Everybody, welcome to the Game Audio Hour, episode 29. It's our weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And to the panel, Alex May, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. I have absolutely nothing humorous to offer today.
That's
I'm
it?
just going to say, I'm great, how are you?
That's it, nothing humorous.
No, sorry.
And I'm going to skip over somebody and go right to Vince. What's up, Vince?
Oh man, I'm doing all right. I actually just moved into a new apartment. I was finished moving at 4:30 in the morning on Saturday.
Oh, man.
Oh wow, my sleep schedule is just totally whack right now, but that's okay. I'll catch up sometime in the middle of this week.
Sleep is for the dead, they say.
Oh man, or the not working. I got so much work to do, but yeah, I'll get it done. It'll be fun.
Oh, well, we had last week's show was such a disaster. We had to make sure that Jack came back to sew us all together for this week. Hey, Jack.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's great to see your face.
Yeah, it's good to see my face, isn't it?
Yeah.
See, that's the Jack humor that we've missed over the past few weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, thank God for it. So Kyle's net connection dropped mid-episode. Oh, Alex is discussing. Sorry, I read. So let me explain my panic there for a second. Last week's show, which you are not finding on our website until we sew it together like Frankenstein put together dead bodies, was such a tech disaster because my ISP provider, Time Warner, who loves me dearly, just kept taking the signal up and down and up and down. And every time it was up, I thought it was up permanently, and I tried to get the show in there again, and sure enough, it was down. And so that was a disaster, but we are going to sew that show together. I think it's only going to end up being like a half-hour show. But, okay, it'll show up on the website. So you're going to see a little gap, episode 27, then episode 29, this one. But so when I saw that in the chat room, I thought that my system had gone down again. Don't type anything in the chat room about systems going down or I'll panic and accidentally false positive shut this one down trying to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, an episode about Black MIDI, there's only a certain way that it could be. It would have to be black and technically chaotic, and that was just exactly what last episode was.
It was very apropos, wasn't it? It was kind of funny how we talked Black MIDI, and and I voiced my opinion about not being a fan, and all of a sudden the signal just went out.
There's probably some connection between Black MIDI and Anonymous.
Yeah, no doubt. And truthfully, I think we're the only podcast that's covered Black MIDI. So, yay!
Yeah. We should do the next thing, which is be the only podcast where we write Black MIDI. Is this the way to appease the Black MIDI gods, or?
Let's. I think the best way to appease the Black MIDI gods right now is to stop talking about them before Kyle's net connection goes out again.
All right. Okay.
I got to be honest though. If we're going to appease the gods, I'd rather print out a bunch of Black MIDI, walk over to a volcano, and throw it in.
Oh, careful there, Kyle. Careful.
We're going to jinx it, guys. We're going to jinx it.
No, you're here, Jack. We're safe. You've got us covered.
Kyle versus the volcano. Yes.
Kyle jumps. That was a great movie, by the way, Joe Volson.
It was. Yeah.
It was. I agree. So, okay. So today's topic, we might have two, but let's just start with one. Alex, do you want to introduce it because it was your idea?
Sure. Well, the topic, guys, today I thought would be interesting to discuss, and also people in the chat room, feel free to chime in with your opinions about this. We were talking about the idea of how certain game genres seem to be inexplicably tied to certain musical genres. So, you may get certain games that intentionally go outside of the norm. For example, a country and western soundtrack to a violent first-person shooter. Not that I can think of many like that right now, but it generally tends to be the case that your fantasy games will have this orchestral background, and first-person shooters have got your big epic, orchestra scores, and shooters will always have techno soundtracks, and the sort of kids games will have sort of light, fluffy, happy kind of music. And what I was thinking to talk about today is just to throw around some ideas about why this is the case. Why is it that certain game genres seem to be tied to certain musical genres when we have the freedom to do whatever we want with the music? And also, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something that we should intentionally be trying to push the envelope and break out of these molds, or is it actually a good thing to sort of give people that reassuring feeling that, oh, I'm playing a shooter because this is a techno soundtrack, or this game looks futuristic, therefore I need futuristic synth music, or this is a fantasy game, therefore we need an orchestra, or whatever. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that so many of these game genres are pigeonholed to certain kinds of music genres? So that's the idea for the topic. So everybody in the chat room, please feel free to chime in with your opinions, and let's get started. Vince.
Well,
okay, Jack.
Well,
no, Vince can go.
Yeah, I definitely have some pretty strong feelings about specific genres. Since I'm such an old school 8-bit NES guy, and I really loved all those classic soundtracks from Capcom, it's always been fun to look at those things and try to figure out what the genre was. Something like Street Fighter, very progressive jazz fusion stuff, and then you go back to something like Ghosts and Goblins, and it's almost like ragtime music. I mean, if you had to call it anything, it would be ragtime music, the way it has that sort of those bass just jumping back and forth like you would with the left hand on a piano. There are some really fun things that were going on with genre there, and some things worked well with the 3-voice, 4-voice, 5-voice, whatever you had back then, and some stuff less well, like trying to emulate a really big sweeping orchestra with your NES or Sega Master System or what have you. But that didn't stop those guys from trying, and I thought it was really interesting that they kept on pushing these types of musical styles in the face of the obvious limitations of the technology back then. Like, well, we got this 8-bit thing. Well, we're going to make something that's big and epic and orchestral. We're going to make something that sounds like a really great live rock band, whatever.
Could that be because of the technical limitations? Actually, you can't get around, in order to create more sort of interest and diversity in the musical sense, you're limited by what you can do with the sound palette and with sound design and instrumentation. So the best way to compensate is to get more creative with the genre. Could that be a reason?
Well, yeah, definitely there's some things that have to be done, some compromises here and there. Sometimes, actually looking back at those old things, I wonder if they were perhaps a little naive about their approach, and they would do something and be like, you listen to it now, and just it works because of the novelty of it, the fact that it was that piece of music, but it doesn't actually succeed in creating the effect that they wanted of being, a filmic orchestral score couched in, 80s epic stuff, or, it's really the big stuff where it was really feeling hard, but that doesn't matter now, because if you really like the game, then the music is going to be fantastic, because it's always just going to be that connection to the game itself. I mean, Final Fantasy I, honestly, it's really hard for me to listen to the music of Final Fantasy I as music. It just is. It's really very naive, very simple programming of that synth compared to what many others have done, even in that same era of NES game development. But my memories of playing Final Fantasy I, the game, though, those were great. And it didn't really matter that the music wasn't really the most awesome execution of those particular themes that were in there. It was like, oh, that's a theme, it connects to this part of the game, cool.
Do you think in some ways we were more in touch, I should say, with what we wanted musically out of a game back in the day than we are now? It seems kind of counterintuitive, but what's happening in games is so repetitive and so derivative of previous games that I'm not seeing enough, and personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't see enough challenge, and enough, I'm not humming any soundtracks. I'm not excited about the soundtrack and get it on CD and play it in my car anymore. Do you think we've ventured down the derivativeness too much, if that's a word?
No. So That's a pretty common and fair argument about modern game music, is that it's not very hummable. But using Vince's example of Final Fantasy One, it's you mush all Final Fantasy One's music together. How many minutes of music is that? 10? 15? They're all very short loops. The reason why you could hum games from your past is because they were Pavlovically punched into your head over the course of 40 hours. Now the big scores, you could be playing a Call of Duty or a Battlefield or any sort of AAA big budget movie-esque game, and the music is always different, or it's adapting and it's changing based on what you're doing, and loops are a bad word these days. Even when loops are used, they're not used in a traditional loop sense. They're part of a bigger whole. So the reason you're not humming it is because it's serving the narrative more. Whereas back in the day, all they could do is have 30-second loops that play whenever you're in town or whenever you're in a battle, and so that's what you had to deal with, and so that just got drilled into your head. If you could hum multiple tunes from any AAA game now, that would be bananas, because most AAA games last less than 10 hours, so if something got punched into you that often, you'd hate that soundtrack, and you would say, oh my god, why didn't they do something better with this music? It was the same track over and over.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, sorry.
Much like everyone in the PS1, PS2 era that played racing games really hates a certain Offspring song and really hates a certain Rob Zombie song.
Nobody hates the Offspring.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. I think the development of music in games has obviously gone parallel with the development of games and also the development of players' expectations for those games. And back in the early days, you're just happy to have any sound coming out of your computer, regardless of whether or not it moves you or anything. It's wow, the computer's making noise, it's making sound. Because I come from a computer background. I started the first games I played were on the Apple II, and in the Apple II, most of the games, unless you had the special sound, what was it? I think it was like a sound card or something that you'd rip open the top of the Apple II and plug it in the back. If you didn't have that, then you just got no sound. So there wasn't any expectation that you would have sound with your game unless you had the special hardware to actually hear it. So that's why when I first graduated from the Apple II to the Commodore 64 and then the Amiga, it was an incredible revelation that wow, every one of these games has sound, and I don't need a special card. There's like 2 RCA ports on the back of the Amiga, and you just plug in your hi-fi, press the loudness button in, and you just rock away. Just the very fact that it had music was amazing. So like Jack said, the fact that the music was looping over and over again didn't really matter. It's like, well, it's playing sound. That's cool. We've got music and sound effects. Great. Now, though, people are looking, we've come so far with games, and especially the AAA games with these huge budgets and absolutely mind-blowing productions, incredible music, regardless of how they are, how you pit them relative to each other. Every one of these AAA games is just an incredible achievement. And all this music, and it's cinematic, and it's interactive, and there's the whole idea that, wow, the music is reacting to what I'm doing in the game, and I think people's expectations have changed so much together with the advancements in the technology that, like Jack said, I totally agree that, if you had a game now with a sort of a hummable melody, by the fact that it's a good melody that's just played over and over again with like a 30-second loop, no, people would really slam a game like that because they say, what is this game audio? This is ridiculous. It's just one track that keeps on playing over and over again, just because people's expectations have gotten so high.
Right, and to add to that, I mean, I think I can name a few examples of recent games that I can't hum the melodies, or I know the melodies. I'm bad at humming, but they are in their mobile games or handheld games. They're PS Vita and 3DS games. They're Japanese RPGs that are calling back to that. So, like, I've been playing Bravely Default, which has a wonderful soundtrack, and some of the tunes in it are very memorable. And also, my girlfriend has been playing Etrian Odyssey, which is like a wizardry first-person dungeon thing. And so it's got very short loops, like a minute and a half, and they're fully orchestrated and use samples. And Etrian Odyssey is done by Yuzo Koshiro, and they're beautiful. And like he's been around since a long time ago, and so it has these short loops, but that's because they're still kind of following the same sort of framework that the technical limitations have informed in the game design of those new games. It's while the visuals and the fidelity of an Etrian Odyssey or Bravely Default is pretty modern, they're still calling back to very, very old games. So people allow that in the games, but you would not be able to have Yuzo Koshiro's music in a AAA PS4 game that had a $50 million budget that just had 30-second loops. I don't think people would respond to that as well. People want the full thing.
I have a question, something that I'm really, really curious to ask, especially to Vince and Jack. You have a lot of experience with the early years and also the current years of Japanese games. Do you feel that there is a difference in the approach that the audio directors take in implementing music in Japanese games versus their contemporaries, their peers in the Western market?
There's definitely a difference. It's really hard to elaborate on what it was, although I'm reminded of a talk that was given by Nobuo Uematsu back in the day when he was describing his responsibilities as a music director. And he would say that in creating the music, he felt that he was responsible for the air of the world. There's all the stuff that's in the world, all the buildings, all the characters, the user interface, the mechanics. But there's the air, and how do you actually give the feeling of the air that actually surrounds us and is always there, even if you're not actually directly interacting with it? And that answered, for me, in my mind, two things. One, how come Uematsu doesn't really do interactive music? Because if he thinks about the music as the air, well, you're not really actively interacting with it. But two, that idea of it just being there and being prevalent and having a flavor and a shape and a thickness to it that's so complementary to everything else that's going on. And I can kind of see how starting from that idea can lead you to a different type of music creation and responsibility compared to other music composers, where you might be thinking about the music either being more specifically communicative of story elements, or interactive and adaptive and communicating things regarding game space and player state. It's not really about that. Instead, it's this complementary thing to everything that the player is actively dealing with. And I think that there are other Japanese composers that probably started from that perspective as well.
Jack, what do you think about Japanese games and their approach to music?
I would agree with what Vince said. I think a modern AAA game that comes to my mind, Japanese game that comes to my mind, is Final Fantasy 13, which still kind of has the traditional overworld loop, battle loop. I might be wrong, but I don't think there was really much adaptive situations or any sort of deep audio implementation technology going on there. But I think that the philosophy behind the battle system of Final Fantasy 13 was they wanted to recreate the kind of like the fight scenes of Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, the CG movie, where everyone's flying around and jumping around. And so I could kind of see that the battle music in Final Fantasy 13 is very good, and I could see how they would want something very specific that would kind of be cinematic to go along with that music. And the other aspect that makes I believe is important to consider with Japanese composers and Japanese music in games. I did a interview with Tomoya Kishi, who is the audio director at Capcom. And he was talking about, I was asking him about the difference between Western sound design and Japanese sound design in terms of variations. And the example I gave was footsteps, how in the West we like to have a lot of variations in footsteps, and we like to, have a bunch of randomization, have a bunch of granularity, and you really hear like the difference in it. Whereas in Japanese games, they kind of pick out the iconic sound, and so they want the best definition of that sound, and so they would only have a few. That way, you're always getting the best of their feeling and their idea of the best footstep sound. And I think that can kind of carry over to the music as well, is they always want the coolest track happening at once. They don't want to maybe split that up to, have any sort of like climax or falling action or anything like that. They don't want to. They want to tell the story through what the composer wanted with the full track, rather than, a Western approach where we have stems and sections and stuff like that respond to parameters. If that makes any sense.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of my days working when I was in industrial designer in South Osaka, working with a manufacturer that made architectural fittings. And one of the things that the lead designer was constantly harping on about was the Japanese term sekaikan. Sekaikan means the feeling of oneness in the world, like the feeling that the world is, this mini world that you're creating is complete within itself, which is a very convenient single phrase that they have to encapsulate that whole concept. And that came up very, very frequently, that, if I would design anything that was a little bit deviant from away from the central oneness of the world that they're trying to create in a visual design, it just wouldn't fit in. It's no good. It has to feel like it's one and part of the whole sekaikan, that whole kind of holistic vision of this little world we're creating with a visual design. Perhaps then, I guess when you come then to the role of music in a certain phase of the game, for example, the combat scene, the idea of interactive music that changes depending on what you're doing, it must be a very conscious decision. Obviously, the audio directors for the big AAA Japanese titles, of course, they have access to all exactly the same technology. They're perfectly capable of making that choice to do interactive music if they want to. But the fact that they don't, probably there must be some philosophy behind that, where they're thinking, well, the best way to pinpoint, like you said, that the best of the footstep sounds, the best way to pinpoint exactly the perfect fit for this, the oneness of this particular world that we're creating with the combat phase of the game, is to fix the music. There's one track that you always hit the same track every time. It's the perfect track in their vision. It doesn't change depending on what you're doing, because that's part of their entire holistic vision of what they're creating. It just seems very interesting to me that the approach to music in implementation is so vastly different. And also, of course, in part then the approach to choice of genre as well, which is our topic.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask you, Alex, as someone living in the culture, is could this lack of adaptive or interactive music be cultural, in that Japanese businesses are notoriously conservative, and we're doing it this way because it's always been how this has been done before? So could it be that the reason there's a lack of this movement in the audio space, which is notorious in all realms of development as one of the last things thought about, could it be that the developers go, well, we'll just have cool loops by well-known composers because that's just what we've always done? Could that be part of it as well?
Absolutely. I would say that's. I wouldn't say that's 100% the reason, but I would say that that's definitely a big factor. When you're a designer in Japan, your street-level reputation, if you like, in a sense, actually, that is more important than your ability to produce quality. Often, there's a huge statue in Osaka that when Vince was here, I was considering taking him to see it, but I didn't because I wanted to save him the torture of it. There's a massive, massive statue that was erected in Osaka for the Expo in the 70s. And it's called the Tower of the Sun, I think, and it's the most incredibly, ridiculously ugly thing you've ever seen. Like, it's just baffling. You see it, and you just go breathless about how stupid it looks. But the thing is that in the 70s, it was created by a sculptor who, he had the monopoly on sort of avant-garde art sculpture at that time. He was the man, you know. You just don't question what he does. So then, taking it then to game development, if you had a massive AAA budget that, for example, a Japanese game developer might have, okay, well, let's get some music in this game now. So who are we going to get for the music? Of course, you know, if you've got the big budget, then you're going to go straight to the top, and you get so-and-so, who is as far as street cred goes, is excellent. Yeah. And then when that person rolls in, as you said, Jack, Japanese people, they value a certain amount of predictability with the way people work. They value, I guess they value refinement of a process over constantly sort of, you know, pushing the boundaries and you know, sort of exploring new techniques. That's not as interesting as setting defined limits and then refining on the inside of those limits, not pushing them out. So if you think about game audio, then perhaps these very, very famous and excellent Japanese composers who contribute to these big AAA titles, they have their delimited, you know, I work in this genre and I work in this style, and now they're just sort of refining on inwardly instead of outwardly, and that kind of process then says, when the audio director or the director of the game says, okay, we've got these music tracks from so-and-so, how should we make this interactive? Well, it's all set here. I've just got this track here for the battle scene track. Mm-hmm. In many cases, because of the vertical nature of Japanese society and the way the hierarchies work, the audio director may not want to step on the toes of this very famous composer by saying, can you just like strip out that there and strip out this here, and we'll bring that in there when the player does this, and this can come in here when the player does that. Probably they wouldn't want to sort of step on the toes there and say, well, you know, I guess if so-and-so, the famous composer, thinks it should be like this for the battle scene, then it should be like that. So that, yeah, I'd say it's definitely a big contributing factor to why there's been less progressiveness as far as musical implementation here than there has been in the West.
Well, that's a great topic, but I think we better reel into the topic at hand of why genres are stuck. Why a particular genre attaches itself to a particular genre of game.
Well, actually, if we can, oh, I was talking like a lot, so Vince can go this time.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, you know, from a larger perspective, I think, you know, we're doing a really good job of selling to gamers. You know, the game industry knows how to sell to gamers, and there's still a lot of gamers out there. And gamers, though, by which I mean those hardcore and core gamers who are aware that, you know, there are more than a dozen Call of Duties out there, and there's more than a dozen Final Fantasies out there, and whatnot. They know how to sell to those guys, and selling to those guys means selling them what they know. So, you know, the imagery that they know, the game designs and mechanics that they know, and also the sound and music that they know. There's some really interesting music that is coming out of games, though. You know, there are some really cool approaches that are very different, and a lot of those actually are part of different types of games, which are finding new players in different places who wouldn't originally consider themselves to be gamers or core gamers, certainly not hardcore gamers. So perhaps this is actually the right time to be thinking about what is going to be a different approach to music, because we can't just rely on gamers. And if you go to any publisher, they're like, well, wow, you're going to sell to this audience? You're not a Call of Duty. You're not a Final Fantasy. You're going to be reaching out and trying to find someone else. And someone else is going to be wanting a different experience, a game experience, a visual experience, and an oral experience.
That is so true, but the grumpy old man that is in me says, how soon before the game industry collapses because we just are pandering to sales that we know we can get, you know? And I mean, we have a product, right? So we're trying to sell a product. I understand that. But what I think we're losing vision of, and I'm not foolish enough to believe that we have to be focused solely on this vision, is that it's a piece of art. We are making art. And you know, if Picasso just kept derivatively creating the same old painting over and over and over, it'll sell great at the beginning because everybody wants a piece of Picasso, but eventually in the end it's going to run itself out. And since what's great about games is it's not a single piece of art, it's a collection of all different types of art. We could take it upon ourselves to say, hey, let's change this up again. Sure, you want your Call of Duty to have your military drums going, and you know, and you want that bum bum sound, you know, and okay, but let's start. Who's going to be brave enough, is what I'm trying to say, to start to look into ways that they can improve the game, not necessarily worry about sales, but improve the game in some way. What they do now is they introduce new art assets, you know, and new ways that you're going to see the game. But musically, I'm not seeing anybody taking a chance in really any genre other than the independent world out there. But any like major publishers aren't really taking.
I think that's the thing, you know, the indies, they know what they want to say on various levels, and with that specific message that they're communicating, they make a concerted effort on all fronts. The visuals say it this way, the mechanics and design say it this way, and the music will say the message of the game in its own specific way. And that's actually really tough to have if the musician, if the composer is not necessarily close to the game project. If the musician is just thinking about this, oh, it's a contract, it's the next check, it's the gig for the next 2 months, and then I'm going to move on to the next gig. He's not concerned about saying anything specifically, he's just concerned about fulfilling a checklist of requirements, whether they be stages or genres or whatever is asked of it. You know, yeah, I think games are art, but it's who is it art to, especially because games are a collection of so many people and so many different talents that are needed in order to make the thing happen. And it can be artistically unified 100%. In a few cases it is, but in most cases it's not.
Is that good or bad?
I think it's not great. I mean, I think it's really cool. Well, you know, just you know, I feel like I'm very lucky where I am right now. Hey, I'm working at that game company, and we're all working on making this thing together, and it's great. And it feels like we're making something where everyone is on the right page, everyone is saying what they want to say, and the game is saying what it needs to be said through it. And I know because of that exactly what music to create, which doesn't exactly fall into a genre. And I know what the sound effects are. And the sound effects are kind of different from what came before. And it's not different for the sake of being different, but different because that's actually just what is asked of the game. Yeah. You know, when you have all these various games, you know, a shooting game, what kind of shooting game? Is it a Call of Duty shooting game? Is it a Gradius shooting game? Is it one of those curtain fire shooting games like we were talking a little bit about last week? Okay.
For a second and a half.
Okay, just gotta step away from that. But but yeah, often that will dictate, oh, well, because it's this, we're going to make this type of music, and just keeps on propagating. And you know, as long as game guys will want to just repeat stuff as opposed to saying something different, even if just a little bit different, well, we're going to get a lot of samey music.
Yeah, so would you say it's safe to say that the big budget games are looking for just the same old thing over and over and over because they know they can hit their numbers with it? They don't want to reach out. And that a high percentage of indie games are looking for something unique, or would you say low percentage. The reason I ask is because like new guys that are out there, should they be looking? This sounds like an easy answer, trust me, but it really isn't if you think about it. Should a new guy coming in who's trying to get get some contracts, should he be saying, I'm only going to concentrate on indie games because that's where I, A, can be creative, B, they're looking for something new and I'm different? Or should he also be looking into the big budgets and saying, I can recreate the last soundtrack that they put out, and so therefore I'm valuable to them for this new soundtrack?
So I think I'm very qualified to answer this question because I stopped doing music because I didn't want to be in those big budget situations. I moved from music more to sound design because I was like, well, I'm really shitty at orchestral music, and a lot of these big contracts from AAA games are going to want orchestral music. What the hell am I going to do? So I started moving towards more sound effect stuff. But indie games, there are still indie games that come to me and go, hey, we want some music for our game. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, well, if I do it, I'm going to do it this way because this is what I like to do. And then I get some contracts to go, okay. And then I get to make music that I want to make that sounds cool to me and the team, and then hopefully other people. That would be nice as well. And that's kind of been my philosophy with music. I mean, I still think I'm 100% a sound design guy now, but I still do get some music gigs that are only in the indie scene. If a AAA developer came to me and wanted, like, hey, we really like the music for Nova 111, make something like that for the next Far Cry, I'd be like, okay, man, but I'm not gonna seek that out or like try to change people's minds. To go back to, I think what Vince was saying, or how I was interpreting it in my lizard brain, was that we can't really expect AAA to change what they're doing because that's AAA's doing what they do, and if we want different music, we got to look in the indie space. And I mean, and Kyle, you were also alluding to like, is the video game industry going to collapse because of the lack of new ideas? And if there was no indie scene, I would say maybe. But indie developers don't stay indie developers forever. You have indie developers that make one or two cool games, they sell very well, and then they become like a middle tier developer, and then maybe that game does pretty well, and then they're all of a sudden they're kind of indie, but they're also selling just as much as an Activision game or as much as an EA game.
We have so few of those, unfortunately, and I really love those level of guys. The indie guys who came up. That game company's one of them. Double Fine's another one that are coming up and doing amazing things. But we've got this plethora of indie developers, which I'm super stoked about, but I fear for their lives, and I'm like, you guys are going to carry us through this almost collapse that I see, as negatively as that sounds. But I see the coin-op collapse, I see the console collapse, I see a next-gen collapse happening because of the way the model's set up right now. And thank God for the indie developers because they're going to usher us through that. But what can they do to survive that change? Because some of the troops are going to get killed during that change.
I think honing their skills with artistic refinement, making sure that, if you, like Jack said, if you're making a game and you heard, Jack is, for example, a sound designer, but you heard his music in Nova 111 and you're blown away because it's brilliant, and you think, well, I want that sound for my game, just make sure that artistically it's refined, it's consistent. And I think, like Vince said, the majority of indie games, the quality indie games at the moment, are really, really good at delivering their message in a very, very succinct, concise, and concentrated, refined package. Everything is consistent. It looks like this, it sounds like this, it plays like this. And like Vince said, that is the real strength that indie developers have. And I think as more people become interested in games via mobile gaming, I guess people say, oh, here's my iPhone, I wonder what I can play on it. And then that then leads on to, I might get let's get a PS Vita, or let's get a PlayStation, or let's have a look at the Steam thing, or whatever. As more and more people get into games, eventually, we may find that there sort of becomes a market for any kind of game, provided that it's sufficiently well done and concentrated enough within itself. So I guess the best thing that people can do, that the indie developers out there, is just really stick at it. Make sure that every one of your games that you're creating is artistically significant and consistent within itself, including the choice of music. And if you're making, like, for example, a very ambitious indie studio, for example, making a first-person shooter, yeah, I guess then you need to really ask yourself those questions. That well, up until now, the market for first-person shooter games, they've been used to this, the big orchestral drums and that kind of stuff. But really, when we play the game, when we're looking at the game, when we're thinking about what we're trying to achieve artistically with this game, does it necessarily have to be that? Is that really artistically the best fit for this setting, or do we just feel that way because we've acclimatized to the market having that kind of music for this kind of game? At the end of the day, maybe that's the right choice. Maybe it is the right choice to have an orchestral score for a first-person shooter game, because that just seems to feel the most comfortable because of that preconditioning with the genres. That's fine. That's fine, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way just because it has been up until now.
I would like to add to that two things. The first thing being that I think that there is that scary line of we talk about, like, having a country and western soundtrack to a first-person shooter or something.
Gun.
But it has to be appropriate. Like, it has to make sense in the story, much like L.A. Noire had whatever kind of soundtrack it had that made sense for it. Red Dead Redemption had an Ennio Morricone sort of soundtrack that made sense to that. If you put if you took the Good, Bad, and the Ugly soundtrack and you put it in Mass Effect, then all of a sudden that's going to be funny. And that's the scary part, is if you have big band jazz in the middle of a very serious sort of setting.
But in those extremes, that's funny. I mean, you might be surprised, and I think that audio directors should be open to the idea of at least listening to an Ennio Morricone score to, a sci-fi game.
I mean, Mass Effect again did that to an extent. They had this sort of synthy sort of thing, and that's the thing. Space operas. Mass Effect is a space opera that is very much entrenched in Star Trek and Star Wars, both of which, all of those movies, very much orchestral, very orchestral. They kind of set the template for that sort of game, that sort of movie setting, game narrative. Mass Effect kind of broke away from that and did it very well through some very talented composers. Now, very recently, Guardians of the Galaxy came out.
Mm-hmm.
And they completely used just 70s music, for better or worse. A lot of people love it and say it fit perfectly, but it fit because the ship of the Milano, as well as Chris Pratt's character, Peter Quill, very much in that world, that 70s world. The inside of the ship is supposed to have those colors. He has those colors. That's what he's entrenched in. He always has that tape player. You get that feeling. Now, if you had that 70s soundtrack in the Star Trek Into Darkness, that'd be weird. But so it has to serve the narrative, is what I'm trying to say.
And Vince alluded to that too when he was saying that the game really will dictate for you what the sound can be. But the game doesn't dictate to you the only sound that you can have. It usually has a few options. And what I'm saying is, and this is in line with the whole topic today, is why have we gotten stuck in the options that we presently have?
Because in AAA games, we have gotten stuck in very specific narratives where you have a short-haired, big, beefy white guy saving something from some less white people. That is all AAA narratives are, and that's why I'm being dead serious. And as such, every other aspect of the game, the art, the gameplay, the sound design, the music, is going to fall in those safe constructs.
Mm-hmm.
What's the maybe we can take some cues from the film industry. Could you tell me why it is that the orchestra is the default for a like a big budget Hollywood movie?
Oh man, can I interject really quick on that? Because when I was a kid, I went to go see Rocky, the first Rocky. Yeah, I'm that old. at the movie theaters, and it had rock and roll in it. And at that time, that blew my mind. Now, I know there were movies before that that had rock and roll, but I had not been seeing those movies. It had all been these orchestral scores. So when Rocky happened and there was rock and roll, I was like, holy shit, that's awesome, man. I felt at that time that they had broken the mold. Even as a little tiny kid, I was aware that that had changed. And so Alex, I mean, that's such a great question. I'm absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've all had that moment, actually, when we've sort of watched a certain movie and realized, oh my god, movie music can be something else.
Yeah.
And for me, that moment was my all-time number one absolute favorite movie in the entire galaxy is 1984 Tron, which had Wendy Carlos's
Wendy Carlos,
the synth soundtrack, which was just wow, wow. Yeah, so what I'm really, I mean, I'm not a super massive movie buff, but I don't really understand why it is that it's the sort of the default setting, so to speak. There'll be different things that deviate from it, but it comes back to the orchestral score. Is there some connection there that we can maybe draw from when we're trying to answer the same question for the games industry?
Oh my god.
How does the movie industry work with music? I mean, how do they even...
They hired John Williams.
Right.
They hire John Williams or people that sound like John Williams.
No, and hey, John Williams is an amazing guy, and who am I as some little dude sitting in this studio making judgments about John Williams? The guy's an amazing person, absolutely. But I don't mean to detract from any composer's talent when I say that I think that we as human beings, whether they're business owners or creatives, want to find the easiest way that we can make money. And creatives will say, hey, I've got a sound, this is the sound, I sell that sound, and you put me in your game or your movie because that's my sound, and you have to capitalize on that. I was reading just an article just the other day. It was actually Joel Jewett, my old boss at Neversoft, in the new Game Informer. He was asked why they put out so many Tony Hawk games, which I was happily involved in the last two. And he said, when you capture lightning in a bottle, you need to capitalize on that because it's very rare. You're not going to do it very often, and you need to make sure that you capitalize on it. And his approach in that article, which was brilliant, was that because the people want that. He wasn't saying, I want to make a shitload of money, and so therefore I've captured lightning in a bottle, and I'm just going to beat it to death. He said, you've captured lightning in a bottle because, and I'm paraphrasing, the players have said they really like what you've done. So keep giving them what they like. That was his approach to it. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's short-lived. He said also in that article that had we just kind of looked, again, I'm paraphrasing, but had we kind of looked at the longevity of Tony Hawk, we probably would have put out 4 games in that lifespan of Tony Hawk. But instead we put out a bunch. And it's because players wanted it, Musically, do players, or in the movies, do people viewing it want to go there and hear the same kind of soundtrack every time?
Well, to play devil's advocate, which was a 1997 film starring Keanu Reeves, Al Pacino, and Charlize Theron.
You looked that up, didn't you? You looked it up.
I did. I didn't know when it came out. I only saw it on HBO. I never went and saw it. I was in 7th grade. I couldn't see
that. You wikied that before you said your statement. I know you did.
No, he's been rehearsing that for weeks. He had that one ready. Whip it out.
But so to play devil's advocate, you're a caveman.
Yes, I am.
You're cold, and the meat you killed is raw. So you need to create a fire.
Yeah.
So now the best way to create a fire, is it using the pieces of the flint that creates fire, or do you think of a way to make a laser that will then shoot beams at the wood to make a fire? Or do you think about it some more and wait for the sun to come out and use a prism and a magnifying glass to separate light into different wavelengths so that you can then use a magnifying glass on the strongest and hottest wavelength, which I think is red. I've been watching Cosmos a lot, and in order to make a fire. You use the flint. So if you want to make people sad, you're going to use violins because violins can make people sad.
Yes. But I'm not disagreeing that is important. I absolutely agree with that. That there are there are templates to music, and we know, and that's the most important thing, because when the hair raises on my arm, I want that to happen, and sad violins will make that happen every time. But the reason you know that a magnifying glass can create heat is because somebody took a chance and experimented.
They did, but they don't do that every time. Scouts don't carry around a magnifying glass. Scouts carry around a little flint thing. Much like there are...
I carry around a Zippo.
I carry around a dragon.
Well, that's the thing, is orchestral scores are the Zippo of creating fire, is what I'm trying to get at. And but there are these other methods, and and they are used. Look at Blade Runner. Look at Guardians of the Galaxy. Look at a bunch of period films which will use period music instead of a score. Yeah. There are other things that do it. It's unfair to say. I'm playing devil's advocate. I hate a lot of films. You know that. Devil's advocate here. There are films out right now, like I was saying, like Guardians of the Galaxy, that don't have an orchestral score. So people are trying it, and I guarantee you Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which will happen, and Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which will happen, will follow that same template. Yeah. Because...
Sorry, go ahead.
Because it works for them, and it is different, but it works. They found a new way to create fire that works in their little cave wherever, and they're going to have fun with it because people had fun with it.
And now the sad thing, though, is now that Guardians of the Galaxy has done well, is now any superhero video game that comes out in the near 3-year future is going to say, hey, let's license some pop songs from the 70s and put it in there. I get so mad at that simple-minded kind of, let's capitalize on what's popular right now, We need
I just want to do... Chase in the chat room has an excellent point. Let me just read out this, because this is very timely to what we're talking about right now. Chase says, I find it so hard when I compose now because I know it's all been done before and I'm fighting to be as different as possible. It takes so much research to stay up on the newest plugins and other things just to make it happen, but having a sound is more important than blending with the noise.
Yeah.
I know I keep talking and I'm sorry, but to this point right now, I would say that you don't have to find your sound, just make cool stuff and a sound will happen. Like my sound comes from default plugins in Logic and Ableton. Like what I would consider like a thing that is a bit unique to me comes from just fucking using some presets, man.
And PSP vintage Walmart. Like I can think of your sound, Jack. So you're being very modest in saying, and I appreciate that because it's who you are as a person. But we were talking about. I want to recap a couple of things here because we're running out of time, and it's such a fantastic subject. Thank you, Alex. It has meandered into all kinds of different realms, but really is a great subject. I know Alex's sound, I know Vince's sound, and I know Jack's sound, and that is absolutely 3 specific and different sounds. It is pretty amazing that you guys have accomplished that. And I know modestly you're going to say to yourself, well, I was just messing about. But you actually have created a sound. And so as Jack was saying, and I say to Chase, just do exactly what Jack said. Just write. Be confident in what you can do, and just present yourself as who you are. I do the same thing, and these other guys do the same thing, and you see success certainly in these other guys. Don't look at me. The camera should not be on me. I should click it on the other people. But that is so important, is to just be yourself, true to the music and true to who you are as a musician. And that's where the crux of my argument for this whole thing has been. And I've been playing a bit of the devil's advocate and trying to kind of stoke the fires with some controversial questions. But the truth is, the industry is in some ways, and you have to find them, looking for unique ways to get themselves noticed through a sound that maybe has not been heard before.
And we really need that. We need that diversity as well. Coming back to the discussion about indie games and the role and the future of games in general, especially as the bigger budgets go for the safer, more predictable options as far as music genres are concerned. We need that diversity as well. Just imagine, like, if all of the wonderful game audio warriors out there watching, every one of them has their own unique sound. Think of the palette of choice that, an indie game developer. well, here I've got this game idea, and it's gotten this far, and now I need some music, and I really want that. I really want that Vince Diamante tone, or I want that Carl Johnson tone, or I need to have the Menhorn. They have so much diversity of choice now that they can choose every one of these. If all of us are doing our best to try and stick to our own sound. And as Jack said, the important thing is that getting a sound. It's not really, it's kind of like that old adolescent issue of respecting yourself, or like having a dream. It's not about making a dream, like Jack said. It's not about making a sound for yourself. It's about just doing things, and as you keep on doing it, eventually you'll find, I really like the sound of this plugin. I might use it all the time, or I really like this approach to making music. I might do that all the time. And just as you do more of it, naturally you sort of find your process starting to kind of narrow down to a certain way of doing things. And every one of us is going to be having that phenomenon, but in a different way, which means at the end of the day, if we've all been doing this for a certain amount of time, at the end of that time, every one of us is going to be completely unique. And the market, in this case the market being game developers, are going to have this beautiful diversity of choice about what kind of things they can apply to their projects. Maybe some of us, maybe you might really enjoy making a kind of genre that's just not really so useful in game music, like Black MIDI. Black MIDI.
It's much more useful at killing ISP feeds.
Right, but even if that's your thing, if you really love Black MIDI, and you just keep on pushing at that, eventually people are going to notice. There'll be like this big budget thing one day, and I know what would be good for this, a Black MIDI soundtrack. Who are we going to get to do that? Let's get the Black MIDI guy.
Yeah. And it seems like intuitively we want to have a career doing this. So we think to ourselves, if I can do a bunch of different genres, if I'm available to a bunch of different studios, I'm going to increase my work. I've never seen that be the case, quite frankly. Unfortunately, it's that statement of a jack of all trades, an expert of none. You really do have to focus in on what you're good at, and that's not just one thing. That might be 3 or 4 things. But if you're trying to do a bunch of things, that's always dangerous. And before I take a chance, before I turn it over to you guys really quickly, I need to apologize to Cardinal in the chat room because he asked a great question. And the reason I didn't bring it up, Cardinal, is because that's such a good question. I think it's a topic for one of the upcoming shows. And his question was basically, let me make sure I read it. Do some big games have no music but all environment? Can you imagine that, playing a game where you're just like environment everywhere? I mean, that really speaks to my soul.
When we let's do an episode on that maybe next week, who knows? But actually, Matt M, another one of our beloved regulars in the chat room, had an excellent tie-in question to that. And he said, "Is it a choice between memorable music or immersion? Can they coexist?"
Yeah.
Because obviously, immersion, when you're thinking of environmental sound in a game, that is full immersion. And of course, memorable music. Matt was referring to, of course, how that applies to music and repetitive music to kind of drive in a theme, as opposed to interactive music. But that can tie in with Cardinal's great question too.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Do you guys got any more things to say on the subject before we sign off? And I know Vince, unfortunately, the last like 15 minutes we've just been so talkative that kindly and patient Vince has waited.
It's been pretty fantastic, everything that's been going on there. What was I going to say? Man, genres. Let's see. There's some pretty interesting books that I've been checking out with regard to the development of Japanese music practices in the 20th century. Kind of related to the video game music stuff. One book is called Blue Nippon, which is actually talking about the development of jazz in Japan and where they got it and how they see themselves within the larger jazz culture, the jazz music world. And the jazz guys have such an influence on video game music. You'll have actual jazz dudes like Masahiro Ando, who is the main composer for Gran Turismo, to the prog guys like Motoi Sakuraba. He owes a lot to the jazz guys as well. So that's a really interesting book. Well recommended. There's There was another book.
I like to hear that, but I have to interject because jazz is what I studied in college, and I think we need more of it in video games.
Well,
I'm looking at you, video game.
play any Japanese game that exists right now, man. Any successful, like I was playing Mario Kart earlier. That has a jazz soundtrack.
Oh, Mario Kart 8 has a fantastic soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. So Mario Kart, Persona, any of the recent Persona games, is well known for their jazzy soundtracks. Pretty much any new like Japanese RPG that has kind of a modern setting, super jazzy.
Well, even old stuff that I've worked on in the past, I was welcome to bring in a jazz sensibility to the stuff that I was working on. I was really happy when that happened. It happened early in my career, though, and so since then I've been like, come on, more jazz, you know, not just pinball games. Come on. Sorry, Vince, go on.
Oh, go on. Yeah, it's so fun that. There was another book that I was reading, and I can't remember it because I've been really stuck on Blue Nippon. It's a huge book, and it's fantastic.
Oh, cool. Send me the link so I can put that in the show links, please.
Yeah. I was also thinking it might be, I would love to ask you guys if there's any weird genres or weird music groups that you think would be a fantastic pairing for a video game.
Yes.
One that comes to mind for me, there is a quartet of recordists. They play recorder all the way from the teeny tiny one all the way to a big bass recorder, and sometimes they'll also do things like little toy pianos and stuff. It's called the Recorder Quartet, and they do some really fantastic stuff. They sometimes go out into Europe, but for the most part they stay in Japan, and they're just a really fantastic group to look up. You should check their stuff out on YouTube.
Yeah, send me the link to that
too. A video game that has that as a soundtrack.
I have one called Godspeed You Black Emperor. Have you guys ever heard of them?
Yes. Well, I actually I did a soundtrack for a game called The Haunted Hell's Reach, which is very Godspeed. So yeah, I would bounce off of that. There's I swear to God, I play and listen to things that aren't from Japan, but there's a band called Mono. I think monofromjapan.com is their website. Mono is Godspeed-esque, but in major keys and not as boring. I would love to see a game with Mono. Godspeed is boring. I saw them live and it was super boring.
Never, ever. It's the greatest thing ever. Never. I don't hear you, Jack. You're dead to me.
I mean, I like their music, but like you gotta be doing something else.
They're long form pieces, so they can. I would agree with Jack as much as I want to fisticuffs them, but yeah, they can be a little long form. But you've got the mustache for it. That's unfair. That is a +5 to fisticuffs. That mustache. But Godspeed, and not to steal from Vince's awesome suggestion as well, it just has a sound that if you put that in like the new Silent Hill or something, not only would the visuals be scary, the music would add to that exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we gave ours. So Alex, who's yours?
I don't want to use up any. Well, we're running over time, but I'm going to say ultra minimal, industrial, dark German techno. That's what I want. The stuff that sounds like a washing machine with a drum beat.
There's a band I really love in that genre, and I can't think of them right now.
I've got loads. That's
I was hoping I could think of them so I could say it and have you go, "Oh my God, Kyle, they're amazing," and we would be best buds for life, BFFs.
We're already best buds for life. Don't worry, Kyle.
Sweet.
If I can do another one real quick.
Nope. We gotta go.
Well, too bad. I'm gonna do it anyway. There's a collaboration between Alva Noto and Ryuichi Sakamoto where they do super minimal glitchy stuff with Ryuichi Sakamoto doing piano over that. Like, I don't know what sort of game it would be. I think the cliche example would be a puzzle game, but like you could do some super cool stuff with that music. It's super. I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah,
but
that's a good. You brought up a good point, Jack. Is that what we should say to the chatties and anybody watching the show? Is sign into our forums, and I'll create like a page where we can say pick a band, you put the band name in, give us a link, and then say what genre of game you think they would be useful for.
Nice. Good idea. Does everybody know that we have a forum? I think it's gameaudiohour.com/forum.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's
So,
it. I can't think of this band that I was trying to think of for you, Alex. But I wanted to show you something, Alex. Go ahead, Jack.
I was just gonna say that you already had your one, so you can't have another one.
I don't have another one, but I would like to thank Alex's uncle, Brian May from Queen, for sending me this guitar.
Whoa! Nice. Yeah, we're related. We are actually related. You know that.
I thought that might be the case, so I wrote him and said, hey, your nephew Alex said I could have a free guitar, and he sent this to me. That's a lie, completely, for those listening to the show, and for those listening to the show, I'm showing my fairly new Brian May guitar, which is an amazing piece of machinery, I got to tell you. So,
do you play it with a 1 pence piece?
No. Nope. I'm much more high-end rent than he is. I have a 5 pence that I play it with. He doesn't make a lot of money. I don't know if you know from Queen. They didn't do very well, so he only he's relegated to a 1 pence. I think Vince is leaving us for our ridiculousness.
We've got to finish.
I do set up the three amplifier system that he has. It's been so much fun. You pick a song from Queen, you do the phase shifting that he has on all those knobs, you run it through your 3 amplifiers, and you're like, Jesus Christ, that guy was a brilliant, or is a brilliant guitar player, and was brilliant to think of that and present it to the musical world.
There's also in the techno circles, there's Derek May. I don't know if you've heard of Derek May. He's a bit of a legend in Detroit techno. No?
Oh, I haven't.
Anyway, yeah, us Mays, we're pretty good with the music, I guess.
Yeah, you guys stick together, the Mays.
That's right.
They even gave you a day. Did you realize that? You have a day dedicated to you.
We have a whole month, Kyle. There's a whole month.
Oh, that one too. I forgot about that. Well, it starts with the day, though. I swear to God, I'm wasting time so I can look up this dang band that I'm trying to impress you with.
Well, put it on the forum. Put it on the forum so everybody can see, Kyle.
I will. Okay, I can't find them. They're on my beatport.com if anybody does that. By the way, before I hang up, Beep, a documentary history of video game sound, is a Kickstarter that just came out. Please go and support that. They've got 42 days left. They're trying to raise $40,000. They're only at 3 right now, but they got a lot of days left, so we should be able to hit that. It's going to be a very exciting documentary, and they've got a lot of people lined up to do a lot of stuff, from directing the whole thing to post-production, voiceovers done by D.B. Cooper. I mean, they've got a lot going on there, so I'll put the link in the show notes, but check out Beep, a documentary history of video game sound on Kickstarter. Very, very cool. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye.
All right.
Thanks, chatties. Great topic, and I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Bye.
Bye, everyone.